There is a moment in life when you wake up and realize that the world doesn't make the sense you always believed it made. It's as if a curtain were removed from your eyes and you saw, for the first time, the naked and raw reality of existence. You look around and ask yourself, why am I here? Why do I do what I do? Why does everyone seem so sure of their purposes when I feel lost in a universe that doesn't answer my most fundamental questions? If you've been through this, if you've felt that strange emptiness that comes with the perception that maybe there isn't an ultimate meaning to all of this, then you've touched what Albert Camus called the absurd. And once you see the absurd, once you truly understand this condition, you never belong to the world in the same way as before. The absurd is not just an abstract philosophical idea that we discuss in classrooms or in dusty books. The absurd is a visceral experience, a perception that can hit us early in the morning when we wake up and wonder why we got out of bed, or in the middle of an apparently normal conversation when we suddenly realize that we're just exchanging empty words about things that may have no importance whatsoever. That's that moment when you're in traffic, looking at hundreds of cars around you, each one carrying a person with their own dreams, fears, and goals, and suddenly you ask yourself, what's the point of all this? What's the end goal of all this rushing around, this incessant search for something we don't even know what it is? Camus saw the absurd being born from the confrontation between two irreconcilable realities. On one side, our fundamental human need to find meaning, purpose, reason for our existence. On the other, the absolute silence of the universe, its refusal to give us any definitive answer about why we exist or what our destiny should be. It's like shouting for an echo and discovering that not even the echo returns. It's like looking for a light at the end of the tunnel and realizing that maybe there's no tunnel, no light, no end, just the infinite journey of a consciousness that questions itself in a cosmos that doesn't care about its questions. But here's what many people don't understand about this perception of the absurd. It's not necessarily a tragedy. It doesn't have to lead us to total despair or existential paralysis. In fact, for Camus, the recognition of the absurd can be the beginning of a more authentic and free way of living. When you realize that there's no predetermined script for life, when you understand that there's no cosmic authority dictating how you should live, you face a frightening but also liberating freedom. You become the author of your own narrative, the creator of your own values, the architect of your own existence. The man who sees the absurd never again belongs to groups that promise easy answers. He can no longer satisfy himself with simplistic explanations about the purpose of life, can no longer blindly adhere to ideologies that claim to have discovered the ultimate meaning of existence. He becomes a stranger in his own society, not because he chooses to be different, but because his perception of reality has fundamentally changed. It's as if he had learned a new language that no one else around him understands, or as if he had developed a vision that allows him to see layers of reality that remain invisible to others. This condition of non-belonging is not a forced exile, but a liberation. The absurd man no longer needs to pretend that he finds meaning in social rituals that seem empty to him. He no longer needs to participate in conversations about the future as if he knew for certain that there's a future planned by some superior force. He no longer needs to anguish over the search for an ultimate purpose because he understood that maybe such purpose doesn't exist, and that this doesn't make his life less valuable or less worthy of being lived intensely. Think about how many times you felt displaced in situations where everyone around you seemed to share a certainty that you couldn't feel. How many times you remained silent while others spoke with absolute conviction about what life should be, about what really matters, about which is the right path to follow. How many times you wondered if you were the only one who wasn't understanding some cosmic joke, the only one who hadn't received the instruction manual for existence. If you recognize these moments, you've already had glimpses of what it means to see the absurd. You've already experienced fragments of this condition of non-belonging that Camus described so precisely. What's interesting is that this perception of the absurd doesn't necessarily make us pessimistic or nihilistic. On the contrary, it can make us more passionate about life, more intense in our experience of the present, more committed to creating value and beauty in a world that doesn't offer them for free. It's as if, by accepting that there's no meaning given from outside, we became freer to create meaning from within, to choose what to value, to decide how we want to inhabit this brief moment of consciousness that is our life. Camus used the image of Sisyphus, the character from Greek mythology condemned to push a stone up a mountain for all eternity, knowing that it would always roll back down. For many, this image represents absolute futility, the perfect example of a meaningless existence. But Camus saw something different. He saw the possibility of Sisyphus finding meaning not in the final objective of his task, which he knows to be impossible, but in the very act of pushing the stone, in the dignity of continuing, in the revolt against the absurdity of his condition. Sisyphus becomes happy, according to Camus, the moment he accepts his situation and decides to live fully within it, without illusions about a happy ending, but also without despair about the apparent lack of meaning. Now I want to ask you directly, you who are watching, have you ever felt this sensation of not completely belonging to the world around you? Have you had moments when you looked at your own life and wondered if you were just playing a role without really understanding the play? If so, write in the comments. I feel this too. Don't be afraid to admit this experience. You're not alone in this perception. And by sharing this, you're helping other people feel less isolated in their own existential journeys. Your response might be exactly what someone needs to read to understand that this feeling of displacement is not a personal failure, but a valid and even courageous way of experiencing reality. The man who sees the absurd develops a different relationship with suffering. He no longer expects life to be fair or for his pains to have a greater purpose. He no longer seeks consolation in promises that everything will work out in the end, because he understands that maybe there isn't an end in the traditional sense, just an infinite series of present moments that must be lived with the maximum possible intensity. This doesn't make him insensitive to suffering, neither his own nor others. In fact, it can make him more compassionate, because he recognizes that we're all in the same fundamental situation. Consciousnesses thrown into an indifferent universe, trying to do the best we can with the limited resources we have. This acceptance of the absurd also transforms the relationship with time. The absurd man no longer lives exclusively focused on the future, always postponing real life until he achieves this or that goal. He no longer gets lost in paralyzing nostalgia for the past, trying to reconstruct a time that has already passed and that perhaps was never as perfect as memory suggests. He learns to inhabit the present more completely, to extract from each moment the richest possible experience, knowing that this moment is all he really possesses, all he can really touch and transform. But living in the absurd doesn't mean living without values or without commitments. On the contrary, the absurd man can be deeply ethical, deeply committed to causes he considers important, deeply involved in meaningful relationships. The difference is that he doesn't base these commitments on the belief that there's an external authority validating his choices. He chooses his values consciously, takes responsibility for his decisions, builds his ethics from his own experience and reflection, not because someone or something told him what was right or wrong. This ethical self-determination is simultaneously liberating and frightening. It's liberating because it allows us to create a morality genuinely our own, based on our understanding of the human condition and our compassion for other beings who share this condition with us. It's frightening because it places the total responsibility for the consequences of our actions on us, without the possibility of hiding behind divine commands or natural laws that tell us exactly what to do in each situation. The absurd man also develops a special relationship with creativity and artistic expression. Knowing that there's no predetermined meaning for his existence, he becomes free to create meaning through his actions, his words, his works. Art becomes not a way to decorate life or escape from reality, but a way to respond to the absurd, to affirm human dignity in the face of an indifferent cosmos. Each creative act becomes a small revolt against meaninglessness, a declaration that, even if the universe doesn't care, we matter to ourselves and to each other. This doesn't mean that the absurd man lives in splendid isolation, creating only for himself. On the contrary, the recognition that we all share the absurd condition can create a profound human solidarity. If we're all lost in the same silent universe, if we all struggle with the same fundamental questions about meaning and purpose, then we have very concrete reasons to support each other, to create communities of care and understanding, to work together in building a more habitable world for all conscious beings who find themselves thrown into this existence. The revolt that Camus speaks of is not necessarily a political revolt, although it can include it. It's a more fundamental revolt against the passive acceptance of the absurdity of the human condition. It's the refusal to submit to despair, the decision to continue living and creating, despite the absence of guarantees about the ultimate meaning of existence. It's the affirmation that, even if our life is brief and our influence on the cosmos is insignificant, it's still worth living this life with dignity, intensity, and commitment to values we choose consciously. Many people, when confronted with these ideas for the first time, feel fear. They fear that recognizing the absurd will lead them to total moral relativism or existential apathy. But experience shows exactly the opposite. The man who truly understands and accepts the absurd often becomes more engaged with life, not less. He becomes more committed to justice, not less, because he understands that injustice won't be corrected by any external force. We can only count on our own efforts and on the solidarity we can build with each other. He becomes more loving, not less, because he understands that love isn't guaranteed by any cosmic law. It's something we create and maintain through our conscious and repeated choices. He becomes more creative, not less, because he understands that beauty and meaning don't fall from the sky. They're things we must produce through our work, our dedication, our commitment to excellence in everything we do. If you've made it this far in this reflection, if these words are resonating with something you already felt but perhaps didn't know how to express, I'd like to make a gentle invitation. Consider subscribing to this channel, not because I need numbers, but because maybe you need a community where these deep existential questions can be explored without judgment, where the search for authenticity is valued more than conformity with ready-made answers. Here we try to create a space where people who have seen the absurd can meet, share their experiences, and build together more genuine ways of inhabiting this strange and wonderful world that is our reality. The journey of the absurd man is solitary, in the sense that no one can make his existential choices for him. No one can assume responsibility for his own life in his place. But it doesn't have to be solitary, in the sense of social or emotional isolation. We can recognize the absurd together, we can create meaning collectively, we can support each other in the difficult but rewarding task of living authentically in a world that offers us no guarantees about anything except our own mortality. The man who has seen the absurd carries with him a kind of lucid melancholy. He knows that his achievements are temporary, that his relationships will end, that his creations may be forgotten, that his own existence is a brief flash of consciousness in a cosmos that existed billions of years before him and will continue existing long after he's gone. But this same awareness of transience can make each moment more precious, each encounter more significant, each experience more intense. It's as if the proximity of death gave more flavor to life, as if the certainty of impermanence made each instant of beauty, love, or creativity more valuable than it would be if we were eternal. Camus understood that this acceptance of the absurd doesn't happen once and for all. It's a continuous process, a choice that must be renewed day after day, moment after moment. There will be days when the temptation to return to comfortable illusions will be strong. There will be moments when the frightening freedom of creating your own values will seem like too heavy a burden to carry. There will be occasions when the silence of the universe will seem more deafening than liberating. In these moments, the absurd man doesn't judge himself for feeling these difficulties. He recognizes them as a natural part of the human condition and continues his journey, knowing that the alternative is not to return to a lost innocence, but to continue growing in wisdom and acceptance. Perhaps one of the most profound transformations that happens when someone truly sees the absurd is a change in the relationship with fear. The fear of death, which haunts so many human existences, can lose part of its power when you accept mortality as a fundamental condition of life. The fear of others' judgment can diminish when you understand that there's no objective standard by which your life should be measured. The fear of failure can transform when you understand that there's no predetermined script you're obligated to follow perfectly. This doesn't mean that the absurd man becomes reckless or irresponsible. On the contrary, freed from irrational fears, he can make wiser, more authentic choices, more aligned with his genuine values. He can take calculated risks in pursuit of experiences he considers valuable. He can commit deeply to people and causes, not because he expects these commitments to last forever, but precisely because he knows they're temporary, and for that very reason, precious. The education of a person who sees the absurd also transforms. She no longer seeks knowledge just to accumulate information or to prepare for a hypothetical future. She seeks knowledge as a way to enrich her present experience, as a way to expand her capacity to create meaning and beauty. She studies philosophy not to find definitive answers about the meaning of life, but to refine her questions and develop more sophisticated mental tools to navigate the complexity of existence. She learns art not to become famous or to impress others, but to expand her capacity for expression and aesthetic sensitivity. She becomes interested in science not because she believes science will reveal absolute truths about the universe, but because scientific investigation is one of the most refined forms of human curiosity, a manifestation of our refusal to passively accept the mystery of the world that surrounds us. Work also gains a different meaning for those who see the absurd. It's no longer just a way to earn money to survive or a ladder to climb toward social success. Work becomes an opportunity to express our creativity, to contribute to collective well-being, to develop our skills and talents, to connect with other people through shared objectives. Even apparently mundane jobs can be transformed when performed with consciousness and dedication, when seen as opportunities to affirm our human dignity through conscious and competent effort. The interpersonal relationships of the absurd man also deepen. Freed from the need to find in others the validation of his own existence, he can love more freely and generously. He doesn't need his relationships to fill all the existential voids in his life, so he can appreciate each person for what they are, not for what they can do for him. He can be more honest in his interactions because he's not afraid that truth will destroy necessary illusions. He can be more compassionate because he recognizes in others the same fundamental condition of vulnerability and search for meaning that characterizes his own existence. The man who sees the absurd and learns to live with it doesn't become a Nietzschean Superman or a completely imperturbable Stoic sage. He continues being human, with all the limitations, contradictions, and weaknesses that this implies. The difference is that he's no longer ashamed of his humanity, no longer tries to escape his condition through grandiose illusions or dramatic despairs. He embraces his humanity as something precious precisely because it's limited, fragile, and temporary. Ultimately, the man who sees the absurd never again belongs to the world of easy certainties and ready-made answers, because he discovered something more valuable, the frightening and magnificent freedom to create his own existence, moment by moment, choice after choice, act after act. He became a stranger in the world of illusions, but a full citizen in the realm of human authenticity. He lost the innocence of believing in pre-given meanings, but gained the wisdom of creating meanings through his own life, lived with intensity, courage, and compassion. And in this loss that is simultaneously a gain, in this solitude that is also a profound form of belonging to the universal human condition, he finds not the answer to the mystery of existence, but something even better, the capacity to live fully within the mystery, to dance with the unknown, to affirm life even in the face of the eternal silence of the cosmos.